The first time I saw her, she was standing in a snowfall counting loaves of bread, and I thought her simple. I have thought a great many stupid things in my life. That one I have never been able to put down. It was the 4th day of January. In the year the frost split the beeches along the Marchgate Road, and I had come up that road with £100 of my brother's money in a strongbox on the seat beside me because my brother would not come himself. My brother never came himself. 11 years he had paid for that house, the coal, the flour, the schoolmaster's stipend, the physic, the roof after the gale, and 11 years he had sent me instead, and I had been glad of it, because it made me feel like a man of God rather than a man who had merely been born beside one. The horse did not like the hill. Neither did I. The snow had come down all night and stopped an hour before dawn, and the moor above Coombe Ashby lay under it white and unmarked as a page nobody had written on yet. And I remember thinking that, and being pleased with myself for thinking it, because I was 26, and I made sentences the way other men whittle. Marchgate Foundling House sat where the estate ended and the moor began. A long grey building, 2 stories, a wall around it, 41 children inside. There was a stone let into the gate-post with a woman's name upon it, my brother's mother, who was not mine, and every winter the frost lifted the letters a little further out of the stone, so that year by year she stood up out of the wall and grew easier to read. I got down into snow to the ankle and led the horse through the gate, and there in the middle of the yard, with no cloak on, in that cold, was a woman holding a wicker tray of loaves and moving her lips. 29, she said. 30, 31. Madam. 32, she did not look up. Her breath went out white and hung about her face. 33. Madam, you'll take a chill. 34, 35. She had a way of touching each loaf with 2 fingers as she said its number, quick, exact, the way a woman tells beads. 36, 37, 38. She came to the end of the tray. Only then did she look at me, and I thought, I remember this precisely, that she had the plainest face I had ever seen do something interesting. She was perhaps 24. Her hair was the color of wet straw and pinned without one thought of vanity, and her hands were red to the wrist and cracked across the knuckles, and her eyes went over me the way a farrier's eyes go over a horse, not unkindly but for the facts. Boots, cloth, collar, face, done. 38 loaves, she said. I congratulate you. There are 41 children. Then some go hungry, I said, and I am sorry to hear it, and I have brought money, and I have brought it 4 miles in the cold, so if you would be so good as to tell me where I may put the horse. No, she said. I stopped. She set the tray down on the lid of the water butt, and the snow came off the eave behind her in a soft rush, and she stood with her cracked hands hanging at her sides and looked at me as though the thing she was about to say had been in her mouth for some while, and was heavy, and might break something on its way out. That's the thing, she said, nobody's hungry. Now, I want that written down plainly, because everything that came afterward grew out of it like a plant out of a crack. I did not understand her. And instead of asking a second question, instead of saying, "How do you mean, madam? Explain it to me," I gave her the smile a clergyman gives a woman he has already decided is not clever. It is a particular smile. I have seen it on the faces of 100 good men. It says, "What a curious creature you are, and how tenderly I shall not attend to you." I said, "Then we may all be thankful," and I took my strongbox and I went inside. The matron's name was Mrs. Alcorn, and I loved her. Everyone loved her. She was 61 that winter and shaped like a cottage loaf herself, with a great soft bosom and small quick feet, and she had a way of taking your cold hands into her warm ones at the door, both of them, drawing them right in against her apron. That made you feel you had been expected in that house since morning, and perhaps since your birth. "Mr. Thackeray, in this weather, come to the fire, sir, come, come, you're perished." The parlor at Marchgate was the only warm room in the building, and everybody knew it and nobody minded, because Mrs. Alcorn kept the children's hands warm at that fire in relays through the worst of January, 6 at a time, counting them out and counting them in, and I had seen her do it. There was a good blaze. There was seed cake. There was a black silk ribbon tied round the sleeve of her gray gown. I saw the ribbon and my heart went out of me, because I knew what it meant, and I had been coming there long enough to know when. "Oh," she said when she saw me see it, and her chin went and she sat down. "Who?" "Little Tobit Ware." She had her handkerchief out before the name was finished. "The lung fever. It came on him the night of the 29th, and he was so hot, sir, so hot, and Dr. Wayland came out to us at 2 in the morning through that snow. God bless the man. He never once asked what hour it was, and there was nothing. There was nothing to be done. He went very peaceful, Mr. Thackeray, at the turn of the year, and I had him in my own arms. And do you know what he asked for at the last?" "Tell me." "His mother." She pressed the handkerchief flat against her mouth and held it there and looked at me over the top of it with her eyes streaming. "He never knew her. He was left at that gate in a straw hamper with a shilling knotted in his shawl. He never in his life knew what a mother was, and that is what he asked for. Isn't that a strange and tender thing?" I said that it was. I said a good many things. I said that God gathers the little ones first because he cannot wait for them. I said that a house which had loved him for 6 years had been his mother, and that he had known it whether he had a word for it or not. I said what I had been taught to say and what I believed, and I believe most of it still, and I knelt with that old woman on the parlor rug and I prayed, and she wept, and the fire spat, and outside the window in the yard a woman in no cloak was counting bread. 6 years old," said Mrs. Alcorn, when we had got up off our knees. "6," I said. And I did not hear it. That is the thing. The number was said in my hearing, and I put it away with the cake and the ribbon and the good warm fire. Afterward she brought the register. It was a great ledger bound in green with a strap, and she carried it in both arms and laid it on the table with the reverence a verger has for a lectern Bible. The Marchgate Register. Every soul that had come through that gate since the house was founded, the date, the name if there was one, the name given if there was not, the schooling, the apprenticing, the leaving, the death. She turned it round to me and gave me the pen, and stood back with her hands folded. "Your brother is very good to us," she said. "Very good, you'll tell him so." I never did tell him so, not once in 11 years. I signed the receipt for the alms, £100, on the 4th day of January, in the space ruled for it, beside the place where his own name stood in that upright hand of his, Fenwarren. And I looked at that page while the ink dried, and I want you to understand what I saw, because I saw it and my whole soul was comforted by it. I saw order. Every name in a fair round copperplate, every date squared to the margin, every column ruled with a straight edge and not one blot in the length of the page, and at the foot, in ink that was blacker than the rest because it had not yet had a fortnight to fade. Tobit Ware, aged 6ers, D 31 December, lung fever, Burr, Coombe Ashby 2 January. Beautiful, I thought, what order she keeps. I closed the book. I have never been able to decide whether I closed it or it closed itself, and I merely permitted it. There is a difference in law and in heaven, and I have argued it with myself at 3 o'clock in the morning for a very long time. She was still in the yard when I came out. The light was going blue over the moor. The tray was empty and the loaves gone in to the children, and she stood with one hand flat on the lid of the water butt and her head bowed, quite still, like a woman listening for something moving under ice. I ought to have gone by. My horse was fresh and the road was bad and the parsonage was 4 miles. "Miss," I said. "Marlowe," she did not lift her head. "Hester Marlowe." "Miss Marlowe, it is a hard thing, the loss of a child." "Yes," she said. "Mrs. Alcorn feels it very deep. I have seldom seen such grief." And then she did look up, and there was something in her face I could not read at all. And it was not grief, and it was not anger, and it took me the better part of 2 years to find the word for it, which is loneliness, of a very particular and terrible kind. The loneliness of a person who has seen a thing plainly in a room where everyone else has agreed not to. Yes, she said, she does, she really does. She feels it very deep. She lifted her hand off the lid of the butt and looked at her own palm, at the wet ring the ice had left on it. That's the part I can't get round, she said. Then she picked up her tray and went in, and the door shut, and I stood in that yard for perhaps 4 seconds with the strangest cold going up the back of my neck, and then I laughed at myself, out loud, alone, in the snow. I remember the sound of it, and got up on the cart and drove home. I said grace that night. I ate a very good mutton. I slept. I must tell you about my brother, or none of it will hold together. The county called him the Cold Duke, and the county was not wrong, only lazy. Corwin was 38 that year and had been Duke of Fenwarren since he was 27. He had a face like the north side of a church, and a voice that made grown men check their sums, and he had never in his life said a sentence he had not first weighed for accuracy. When our father died, leaving debts, a mistress in Bath, and a bench of magistrates who had not been disturbed in 40 years, Corwin went through the estate ledgers line by line for 9 months. He came out of that library like a man coming out of a mine. He turned out a cousin, 2 stewards, the whole Fenwarren bench, and a physician who had been charging the tenantry for a cordial that was chiefly gin. He hanged nobody. He ruined 4 men who had it coming, and he never once raised his voice while doing it, and the county has never forgiven him for being right. He did not dance, he did not shoot, he did not keep a pack, he read. And once a year, in the last week of Advent, he sat at the great desk in the library at Fenwarren Hall with the Marchgate accounts before him in their green binding. The flour, the coal, the schoolmaster, the physic, the shoes, the burials, and he went down the columns with the point of a pen, and he added them himself, and he signed. And he never went. I asked him about it exactly once, when I was 22 and newly ordained and insufferable. It was Advent. There was a fire going, and he had the accounts open and a lamp at his elbow, and I stood on the hearthrug in my new black and said, "You might visit them, you know." He turned a page. Might I? They would be glad of it, to see the man whose name is on the paper. Would they? It was your mother's house, Corwin. The pen stopped. It did not lift. It stopped, with the nib down, and a little bead of ink went out into the paper and spoiled a figure, and he blotted it and wrote the figure again. Yes, he said, it was. And that was the whole of it. He was my half-brother. His mother had died bearing him and left her fortune to a foundling house on the edge of the moor and her name in the gatepost. My mother was the governess our father married 11 months later, in a hurry, in a poor church, and the county has never forgiven that either. Between Corwin and me lay a great cold room, and I had my collar, and he had his pen, and neither of us ever once went into that room to see whether there was a fire laid in it. So he paid, and I went, and Mrs. Alcorn wept when there was cause, and the letters in the gatepost stood a little further out of the stone each winter. 11 years. I have gone over that year, the year between, many times, looking for the place where I might have turned. There were places, that is the horror of it. It was not a wall, it was a whole country, and I walked through it with my hat on. In February, I dined with Silas Bramfeld and Dr. Whalen at the rectory, and we talked of the drainage. In April, I married a farmer's daughter at Coombe Ashby, and the joiner end coin stood at the back with his cap in his fist, and afterward he asked me, in his slow way, whether the house on the moor was well, and I said it was, and he looked at his boots and said nothing more, and I thought him dull. In June I saw Hester Marlowe in the market at Ashby Cross with 2 of the smaller children by the hand, buying nothing, only counting the price of eggs off the board with her lips moving, and I raised my hat, and she looked straight at me and did not curtsy and did not smile, and Mrs. Wayland, who was beside me, laughed and said, "That one. She has no more manners than a gatepost and no more wit. She is the under matron, is she not?" She is a thing that was left in a fish basket, said Mrs. Whalen comfortably, and Alcorn raised her out of Christian charity, and she counts. She counts everything. Blankets, sir. Last spring she counted the blankets and made that poor woman weep for 2 days, over 4 blankets that were burnt after the measles, as anybody in the parish could have told her and did. And I laughed. God have mercy on me, I laughed, and we went on to look at a heifer. In September the harvest came in, and I preached on the parable of the sheep and the goats, and I was pleased with the sermon, and the phrase I was pleased with was, the smallest gate in the wall of the kingdom is the one that is opened from the inside. I have never preached it since. In October, Corwin sent me a note of 4 lines to say that he would be in London for the sitting, and that the Marchgate alms would go by my hand as usual, and that he trusted my health continued good. And in November, this is the one that costs me. In November I was coming out of the vestry at Coombe Ashby, and there was a woman standing at the Lychgate in the rain, and it was Hester Marlowe, and she had walked 4 miles. She did not come forward. She stood in the gate. "Mr. Thackeray," she said, "may I ask you a question about the burying ground?" And I had a christening at 3, and my boots were wet, and Mrs. Whalen's remark had done its quiet work in me for 5 months, the way such remarks do, and I said pleasantly, kindly, in a voice full of tea and warmth, "Miss Marlowe, you must not distress yourself so. Come inside and warm yourself, and we shall say a prayer for them, and then you must go home and let the dead alone." She looked at me for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "I won't come in." And she turned and walked 4 miles back up the moor road in the rain, and I went to my christening, and I was very good at it. The next December I came up the Marchgate road again with the strong box, and she was waiting for me at the gate. Not in the yard. At the gate in the road in the dark, with a storm lantern in the snow, and she had been standing there a long while, because the drift had built against her boots and up the hem of her gown, and when she moved it broke away in a wall. I hauled the horse up. The lantern came up level with my face. "Mr. Thackeray," she said, "how many burials did the sexton do out of this house last year?" "Good evening to you also." "How many?" "Miss Marlowe, it is 9 degrees of frost, and I have £100 of my brother's money under this seat, and I have no intention of discussing." "9," she said. The horse shifted. I did not. "9 burials," she said. "Out of Marchgate in 11 years I have been to the ground at Coombe Ashby, and I have read the stones. Tobit Ware. Susan, no, not yet, I'm ahead of myself." She stopped and shut her eyes, and I saw her go back to the beginning and take them in order, and her voice when it came again was as level as a man reading a lease. "Anne Fetch, Jonah's Pike, a boy called Sim who had no other name, Mary Ann Culliver, Thomas Redfern, Lucy Soule, Tobit Ware. And 2 before my time that I have off the stones and out of the book, Robert Grange, and a girl entered only as infant, female. 9 children die, Miss Marlowe. I have been in this house," she said, "since I was 2 days old. I was left in a fish basket at that gate, and Mrs. Alcorn fed me with a rag dipped in milk for a month, and I owe her my life, and I say that first because it is true and because of what I am going to say next. I have been under matron 4 years. I have lived in that house 24 years, and do you know what I have never once done in the whole of my life?" The lantern shook. It was the cold, it was not her. "Watched one die," she said. The snow came down between us, very quietly, the way it does when there is no wind. "I have watched sheep die," she said. "I sat 11 hours with old Nan Purley in the almshouse, and I know what it looks like when the breath goes out of a thing, how it comes slower and then not at all, and how the face changes after, and how long it takes to change. I have seen a horse go down in the beck and be 4 hours dying. I have seen it, Mr. Thackeray. I am not a squeamish woman, and I am not a stupid one. Whatever they tell you at the rectory. Miss Marlowe, every one of them takes the fever at the turn of the year, not in the spring when they cough, not in the summer when the flux is in the village. At the turn of the year, in the last 3 days of December, every single time for 11 years. She counted them off against the lantern's iron ring with 2 fingers, the way she had counted the loaves. Every one of them worsens in the night. Every one of them is dead by morning. Every one of them is carried out at first light by Mr. Bramfield's men, in a box, and the box is already closed. And I am always, always, always sent to the bread yard. That is grief speaking, I said. It's arithmetic speaking. Miss Marlowe, in God's name. They are always 6 years old, she said. And I stopped. Not 4, she said. Not 8. Not 2, and we have had 2, and one of them was so weak the doctor came 4 times in a fortnight, and she is alive today, and her name is Bessie, and she is 11, and she can whistle. Not the sickly ones. The strong ones. The ones with their teeth and their growth on them and a year or 2 of schooling in them, and every one of them 6 years old. 9 children. 9. And there is a thing I have never told anybody, she said, because there is nobody to tell. The January that Tobit Ware went, the baker sent up 38 loaves. 41 children in the house and 38 loaves, and the baker delivers by the list, and the list comes down from Mr. Bramfield's office in Coombe Ashby, and I have the docket, sir. I have every docket in that house for 4 years, and that docket is dated the 28th of December. She lifted the lantern higher so that I could see her face. He was alive on the 28th, she said. He was in the schoolroom on the 28th. He took the fever on the 29th and he died on the 31st, and the bread for the house had already been altered on the 28th, and it was altered by 3 loaves, and there is 1 loaf a day for every 3 children. I sat on that cart in the snow and looked down at her, and I would like to be able to tell you that my blood ran cold and I understood. It did not, I did not. What I felt, and I have had a long time to be exact about it, was irritation. The tight, hot, hurrying irritation of a comfortable man who has been stopped in a lane by something he cannot immediately put down. You have gone to Mr. Bramfield with this, I said. Twice. And he was very kind to me, she said, both times. Something in the way she said it should have opened the ground under me. It did not. Then go to him a 3rd time, I said, and I shall speak to him myself. And now, Miss Marlowe, for the love of heaven, let me get this horse in out of the cold. She stepped back into the drift. She held the gate for me. The lantern went down to the level of the axle, and she said, in the flattest voice in England, Mind the ruts, sir, there's ice under the near one. And I drove in. Mrs. Alcorn was on the step with her arms already open. There was a fire. There was seed cake. There was a black silk ribbon on the sleeve of her gray gown, and she saw me see it, and her chin went, and she sat down. Susan Bright, she said. The lung fever, sir, she was so hot. Dr. Whalen came out to us in the night, God bless him, through that snow, and there was nothing to be done. Nothing. She went very peaceful. She was 6 years old, and I had her in my own arms at the end, and Mr. Thackeray, sir, do you know what she asked for? I heard myself say, her mother. Mrs. Alcorn's face came up out of the handkerchief. Why, she said, yes, yes, she did. However did you? And then her mouth trembled and folded, and she said, oh, but they all do. They all do, poor lambs. It's the fever in them. They none of them know what they're asking for, and that's the pity of it, isn't it? That's the very pity of it. And she wept. She wept, and she was not lying, and I want that understood before anything else in this account is understood. That woman was not lying. I have sat with liars in every condition of life. I have taken the last confession of a man who had cheated his own daughters, and I know what it looks like when a soul is holding a stone under its tongue. Mrs. Alcorn wept over Susan Bright with her whole heart, at 62 years of age, with her gray hair coming down, and she had held that girl in her arms while the girl went quiet, and she had prayed over her, and she had never once in her life done a wicked thing. We knelt on the rug, I prayed. Then she brought the great green register and laid it on the table and turned it round and gave me the pen, and I signed for £100, and beside my name was my brother's, and at the foot of the page, in ink not yet a fortnight faded, in that fair round copperplate with never a blot in the length of it. Susan Bright, age 6ers, D30 December lung fever, Burr, Coombe Ashby 1 January. And I looked at it for a long time. "It is a beautiful hand, ma'am," I said. "Whose is it?" "Oh, mine's a scrawl," said Mrs. Alcorn, blowing her nose. "Mr. Bramfeld writes it up for us, sir, at the quarter. He comes and does it himself of an evening and won't take so much as a glass. He says a charity's book is its conscience, and it must be kept fair or it's kept for nothing." She folded the handkerchief into a little square. "There's not a kinder gentleman in this county, and I don't care who hears me say it." I got out onto the moor road at about 7, and the sky cleared as I came down off the ridge, and a moon came up over Coombe Ashby, very white, very cold and low, so that the snow on the whole world went blue and my own shadow ran out along it beside the cart, and there was no sound anywhere at all but the horse and the wheels. And somewhere near the 3rd milestone, in that enormous silence, I heard my own voice say, out loud to nobody, 9. The horse's ears went back. I sat with the reins slack and let him take me down, and my mind did what a comfortable mind does. It began, all by itself, without asking me to build. The child sickens at the turn of the year because that is when the cold bites hardest and the house is at its lowest. And the strong ones are 6 because 6 is when they are put out of the nursery into the long dormitory, where the window will not shut. And the box is closed because a foundling house has 41 living children in it and cannot have a dead one lying open in the hall. And she is sent to the bread yard because she is a young woman who was raised in that house, and Mrs. Alcorn is not a fool and would spare her. And the bread was altered on the 28th because a baker's boy came to the office, and someone in that office, doing his tidy work by candlelight, made an entry in the wrong week. There you see how good it is. Every fact answered, every stitch closed. I built that in 4 minutes on a moonlit road, and by the time I reached my own gate it was as solid as the gate, and I could lean on it. And under it, all the way down that hill, like water running under ice, went the other thing, which had no words yet and which I would not look at, and which said only, "She has the docket." I did not go to my brother. I went to Bramfeld. I have thought a great deal about why. I was a coward, and I have said so, but that is not the whole. The whole is this. I went to Bramfeld because I wanted the thing explained to me by a man I liked, so that I could stop carrying it. I did not go for the truth. I went for the cure. His office was over the corn merchants in the market square at Coombe Ashby, up a black stair with a rope for a banister, and it was the tidiest room in the county. Silas Bramfeld had been trustee of the Marchgate charity for 20 years, appointed by our father, kept on by Corwin, kept on. Mark this, precisely because he was thorough, because in 9 months of turning out every rogue on the estate my brother had found the Marchgate accounts to be the one set of books he could not fault. He was a spare, gray, tidy man of 50. He had buried a wife. He kept 2 old spaniels that were past everything and would not have them put down. He read the lesson at Easter and read it well, and had made a woman in the 3rd pew cry with the 6th verse of the 15th chapter. He came round the desk with both hands out. "Mr. Thackeray, in this weather." "Mr. Bramfeld, a small matter, delicate." "The best kind." He put me in the good chair, which was the one nearest the fire and the one he never took himself. "Well." "The undermatron at Marchgate, Miss Marlowe." And something happened in his face. It was not alarm. I have gone back to that room 10,000 times and stood in the corner of it and watched his face, and it was not alarm. It was sorrow arriving on the instant, fully made, the way a coach arrives when it has been waiting round the corner since noon. He said. He went back round the desk and sat down heavily and looked into the fire. "She has spoken to you." "She has." "About the children." "About the children." He was quiet for a while. One of the spaniels came and put its chin on his shoe. "Sir," he said at last, "do you know how that woman came to be in that house?" I understand she was a foundling. She was found on the step in a fish basket, 2 days old, in January. He said it gently, and he was not performing. There was a crack in the middle of it. The frost was so hard that year they could not bury widow Sallow for a fortnight. And Alcorn, who was a young woman then and had lost a husband and a son of her own within 9 months, which nobody remembers now, Alcorn sat up with that basket and fed the creature in it with a rag dipped in milk, drop by drop, for 1 month. Every 2 hours, day and night. It is a wonder she lived, and it is not a wonder that she loves that house past reason, because that house is her mother and her father both, and there is nothing else on this earth she has got. He looked up. And when a child dies in it, he said, she cannot bear it, sir, so she counts. I said nothing. She counts the bread. She counted the coal in November and came down here to tell me we were being robbed by a hundredweight, and we were not. The scale at Kelso Bridge is out and always has been, and I have written to them about it 4 times, and I will show you the letters. She counted the blankets last spring and made that dear old woman weep for 2 days over a discrepancy of 4, and the 4 were burnt in the yard after the measles by Dr. Wayland's own instruction, and he will tell you so. He put his hand flat on the desk. Mr. Thackeray, she is not wicked. I want you to hear me say that. She is not wicked, and she is not even wrong to grieve, and I would not have one word of blame put on her. She is simply a woman whose mind has fastened upon numbers because her heart has nowhere else to go. The fire ticked, the spaniel sighed. And oh, it was kind. That is what I need you to feel, sitting wherever you sit with your own good conscience about you. It was so kind. It was so patient. It cost me nothing at all to believe, and it explained every fact I had, and it left me a good man in a good chair by a good fire, and it was, from the first syllable to the last, entirely true. Every word of it was true. That is how it was done. Then I shall say no more of it, I said. I would be easier if you did not. He saw me to the door himself and helped me on with my coat, and at the top of that black stair, with his hand on the rope, he said, "There is one thing I would ask of you, sir, as a favor to a man who cannot do it himself." "Anything." "Be gentle with her." His eyes were wet. I saw it. "She has no one. And she will get worse, Mr. Thackeray, these cases do, and one day there will have to be a settling of it, an arrangement, somewhere she can be quiet and cared for. And when that day comes, I should like her to be able to say that the clergy of this parish were never once unkind to her." I went down that stair into the market square with my heart entirely at rest, and I remember that the sun had come out on the wet cobbles, and that I bought a paper of chestnuts from a boy at the corner, and that they were very good. "You are a good man," Silas Bramfeld had said to me at the top of the stairs. I have turned that sentence over more than any other sentence spoken to me in my life, not because it was a lie. Because he meant it, because he had looked at me carefully, the way he looked at a column of figures, the way a man looks at a lock before he chooses the wax, and he had seen precisely what I was, and there was no scorn in it at all. He was right, I was a good man. That was the whole of what he needed. 11 months. That is the number in this account which is mine, and I set it down beside her 9 so that it may be read against it. 11 months, in which a woman with red hands stood in a yard at 7 in the morning and counted 41 children aloud, and counted the loaves, and kept every docket in a flour sack under her bed because she had no box, and did not once come down that moor road to the vestry again, because I had told her at a lich gate in the rain to go home and let the dead alone. 11 months, in which I dined twice with Silas Bramfeld and thought him the best of us, in which I saw her at Ashby Cross in June and raised my hat and crossed the road before she reached me, not from unkindness. I would not have called it unkindness. I would have called it sparing her the awkwardness, and that is a phrase I have never been able to say since without something turning over in me. 11 months, at the end of which a boy called Jonas Cade, a strong lad, a whistler, a great one for climbing the wall to look at the moor, would come to his 6th birthday in the last week of Advent. And I was warm all that year and well fed and much respected, and I slept every single night straight through until morning. Then in the March that followed, I buried a farmer at Coombe Ashby, and afterward, while the sexton filled in, the joiner End Coin stood beside me at the graveside with his hat in his 2 hands, and only to fill a silence, only because the wind was cold and a man must say something over a hole, I remarked what a great deal of work the winters had been for him of late. "Middling," said Coin. "Middling, with the fever up at Marchgate." And End Coin turned his slow head and looked at me sideways, the way a man looks at a beam he has begun to doubt. "3," he said. "I've made 3 boxes for Marchgate, Mr. Thackeray, in 11 year. Honest count. Chunk 1 equals 4,610 words. Running total 4,610/12,765. Chunk 2, movement 2, the vestry floor, the ride to Fenwarren, the accounts, the 2 in the morning arrival, Hester counting before the Duke, the flour sack will run tilde 4,300. Chunk 3, movement 3, the 9 days, Mrs. Alcorn's undoing, Kelso Bridge, the wagon home, the trustees, the year of Tuesdays, the bread yard proposal, will close it at Bolo or main. Chunk 2, Abhilick to Hoon. Running thought for 48, thought for 48 schunk 2 of 3, movement 2. Picks up at the graveside mid-sentence with Coin. Paste directly beneath Chunk 1. 3, said Coin. I've made 3 boxes for Marchgate, Mr. Thackeray, in 11 year. The wind came over the churchyard wall. The sexton's spade went in and out, and the farmer's widow was already down the path and through the lych gate with her sons on either side of her, and there was nobody in that ground but the 2 of us and a great deal of God's silence. 3, I said. 3, sir, there was the Redfern lad, there was the little Culliver girl, there was a boy called Sim. He counted them on his fingers, and his fingers were the size of my wrist, and I'd have done 'em free. Free. I'd have found the wood myself. He turned his hat round in his hands. End Coin was 50 and had a wife and no children, and had never in his life used a word he did not need. It's a small board, Mr. Thackeray. It's nothing. It's a morning's work and a bit of elm, and I'd have shaved the edges soft, and I'd have done it in my own time and been glad. And I went to Master Bramfeld, and I said so, in this very ground, standing about where you stood after the Culliver girl. And he thanked me very kind. Coin looked away toward the moor. He said the trust must go to the lowest tender. He said there's a man at Kelso Bridge does 'em cheaper. He said, and Coin's slow mouth worked once, and I saw that he had been carrying the sentence for years and had never had anywhere to put it down. He said the Duke sees every farthing. I heard the spade, I heard a rook. And there've been 6 more since, said End Coin, as I hear it, and a man at Kelso Bridge has made them all, and I've never in my life understood, sir, how a box for a little one can be a thing you'd send 12 mile for. He put his hat on. I mean nothing by it, he said. I'm sure it's all in order. I did not go home. I went into the vestry at Coombe Ashby and shut the door and stood in the middle of the flags in my surplice with my hands hanging, and I could not think of what I was doing there, and then I could. The sexton's fee book is kept in the press under the copse. It is a black book of no interest to anyone alive. In it is written what the parish paid and to whom for every hole dug in that ground since the year 1784, the fee for the bell, the fee for the ground, the fee for the digging, the fee for the affidavit in wool. Nobody reads it. It is not scripture, and it is not accounts. It is the parish's way of remembering that a man was paid for his trouble, and it goes back 40 years, and I had signed the bottom of every page of it for the last 4 without once looking above my own name. I took it out. I sat down on the flags with my back against the press because my legs would not hold me at the table, and I laid the book open across my knees, and I went back 11 years. Where Tobit of the Foundling House, ground 3s, 6D, digging 2s, bell 1s. Bright Susan of the Foundling House, Soul Lucy of the Foundling House, Redfern Thomas of the Foundling House, Culliver Mary Ann, Pike Jonas, Fetch Ann, Grange Robert, Sim no other name given. 9. 9 holes, 9 fees, 9 names in the sexton's black book in the sexton's bad hand, and 9 little mounds in the north corner of that ground where I had stood 11 times and prayed the same prayer, and 3 coffins in 11 years. I sat on the vestry floor for a long time. The light came through the little window green because of the yew, and moved and went off the wall, and the church went cold, and I did not move. Then I heard my own voice ask the question, in an empty church, of a God I have served all my life and understood on perhaps 4 occasions, and it was not a prayer and I did not intend it as one, and it is the only sentence I have ever said out loud that I would rather have died than say. What did we put in the ground? I took a lantern into the north corner that night. I do not know what I meant to do. I had no spade and would not have used one, and there is nothing in heaven or the law that could have made me lift so much as a sod. I think I went to look at the grass. 9 mounds. The grass was long over the old ones and thin over Susan Bright's, and the frost had heaved the little turf edge up at her head, and I got down on my knees in the wet and pressed it back with my hands, and knelt there in the dark with a clergyman's lantern and 11 years of the Marchgate Register standing in front of my eyes, fair, round, ruled, unblotted, and not one word of it written by the woman who wept over it. A charity's book is its conscience, Silas Bramfeld had said, and it must be kept fair or it's kept for nothing. Some of them may be alive. That was the thought. It came to me kneeling on Susan Bright's grave with my hands full of frozen turf, and it went through me like a bar of iron, and I said aloud, "Oh God!" And then I was up and running, a man of 26 in a black coat, running through a churchyard at 9 at night, falling once over a stone, up again, running for the stable, because if the mounds were empty then the children were somewhere, and if they were somewhere then they were somewhere now, tonight, breathing in the dark at a distance, alive. And I had had that thought available to me for 15 months. They would not wake him at first. I went past the man at the door. I have never done such a thing before or since. I put my hand flat on that good servant's chest and moved him aside like a chair, and I stood in the great hall at Fenwarren under the cold portraits, and I shouted my brother's name up his own staircase until a light came. He came down in his shirt sleeves with a candle. No coat, no stock, his hair out of its ribbon. He looked at me soaked to the thigh, hatless, mud to the elbows, a churchyard on my knees, and he did not ask one question. He set the candle on the newel post. "The library," he said, "sit." I did not sit. I stood on his hearth and I told him, and it took 11 minutes, and he did not move once in the whole of it. Not a hand. Not his weight from one foot to the other. He stood with his back to the dead fire and his arms folded, and he listened the way he read, for the figures in order without expression, letting nothing past. The bread on the 28th, always 6, always the turn of the year, always the box closed, always Bramfeld's men, always the bread yard. 9 burials. 3 boxes. When I finished, the clock on the chimney-piece let go a single stroke for the half-hour, and my brother crossed the room to the great desk and unlocked the drawer beneath it and took out the Marchgate accounts. 11 volumes, bound in green, one for each year of his stewardship, stacked and squared. He set them on the desk. He turned up the lamp. "Read me the burials," he said. I read them, 9 across 11 years, 1 line apiece. "Read me the timber." I turned back and forward and back. There was no timber. There was no elm, no deal, no board, no nails, no joiner, no coin. There was, 9 times in 11 years, 1 line in a fair round hand. "Sundry's funerary per contract, Kelso Bridge, 1 4 poundses, 0d." "Again," said my brother. "Sundry's funerary per contract." 9 times. 9 times. At £1 4. At £1.4. He put both hands on the desk and leaned on them and looked down at the open book, and I watched him do a thing I had never seen him do, which was to add a column he had already added in his head with his eyes shut. £11 16 shillings, he said. In 11 years, that is what it cost me to have 9 children carried out of my mother's house. He turned to the last page of the last volume. And there at the foot of it, under the flour, under the coal, under the schoolmaster's stipend and the physic and the shoes, was his own signature. Fenwarren, upright, unhurried, the same hand that had turned out 4 magistrates. And under the year before it, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. 11 of them, one for every advent he had sat in that chair with the lamp at his elbow, and gone down the columns with the point of a pen, adding and finding it all correct. He looked at it for a long while. They were 6, he said. Yes. All of them 6. Yes. Not the sickly. No. He straightened. He walked to the window and looked out at nothing, at his own black park, and when he spoke again his voice had not risen. It never rose. It went quieter and flatter, and something behind his teeth went white. Do you know what a child of 6 is worth, Ambrose? No. To a mill agent in the north, bound on a 7-year indenture with no parish behind it and no mother to ask after it, and a certificate of death filed in a country church so that no one ever will. He did not turn round. It is £11. A boy is £11 and a girl is 9, and if the boy is strong and has his growth and a little schooling, so that he can be trusted with a piecing machine and will not have to be beaten into understanding, he is 12. 6 is the age. Younger, and they die on the road and the agent has bought nothing. Older, and they remember their names and where they came from and they run, and a runaway is a loss. 6 is the age at which a person is large enough to work and small enough to forget. The window glass was black, and I could see his face in it. I know this, said the Duke of Fenwarren, because I sat in the Lords in the spring and heard it read aloud out of a commissioner's report. It took an hour. I remember thinking that the man reading it had a cold. I remember thinking, what a wickedness, and I remember that we adjourned and I dined at my club and I came home to this house. He put his hand flat on the open page, over his own name, and left it there. And I signed this. I said because I was a clergyman, and because it was true, and because I would have said anything at all to keep the room from what was in it. You could not have known. He turned round. I have been looked at by a magistrate and by my father, and once by a dying woman who did not want me there. That was different. My brother looked at me the way a man looks at a stone in his own field that he has walked round for 11 years. I could not have known, he repeated, because I did not go. He came back to the desk. Who told you? The joiner. Yes. Who told the joiner? Nobody. He was standing at a grave and I made conversation. Then who, said my brother, told you to look? And there it was at last, at 1:30 in the morning, in a warm library, 4 miles from a cold house. I said her name. He asked me who she was, and I stood on his hearth and I told him, and I did not spare myself one syllable of it, because I had been sparing myself for 15 months and I was sick to the soul of the taste. An under matron, a foundling out of a fish basket, 2 days old, fed with a rag, 24, red hands, no cloak, a woman who counted the bread and found it short 3 loaves in the week a boy died, and kept the docket, and kept every docket for 4 years in a flour sack under her bed because she had no box, who walked 4 miles in the rain in November to ask me a question about a burying ground, and I told her at the Lychgate to go home and let the dead alone, who stood at that gate in the snow last December with a lantern and told me 9, and told me 3 days before, and told me always 6, and told me I have never once watched one die, who went to Selah's Bramfeld twice, who was explained to me, so kindly in a good chair, by a good fire, by a good man, and who is set down in this parish as poor, odd, and touched, and who has been right alone in a house of 41 children for 4 years. My brother heard the whole of it standing perfectly still. Then he said, 11 months. Yes. She stood in my gate and told you the sum, and you gave her 11 months. Yes. And I gave her 11 years. He took his hand off the book at last, and looked at his own palm as though he expected to find something on it, and closed it. Get the horses, said the Duke of Fenwarren, all of them, and send a man for Wayland. No, not Wayland. He stopped in the middle of his own floor, and I watched him understand in 1 second without being told that the physician who came out at 2 in the morning through the snow every year, God bless the man, was Selah's Bramfield's sister's husband. Send nobody, wake nobody in this county. We go ourselves. There is a thing about that ride I have never been able to make anybody feel. 2 in the morning, 10 degrees of frost, the moon down and the snow lying blue-white under starlight, and the road so hard that the horses rang on it, and 8 of us, my brother, myself, and 6 of his own men, roused out of their beds and given no reason at all, going up the Marchgate Road at a canter with lanterns swinging. The noise brought the house up out of its sleep. I saw the candles start along the long windows, 1, then 3, then a dozen. I saw the small white faces come to the glass on the upper floor, and a hand wipe the frost, and another face behind it. 41 children hanging out of the dark to see the lights come. And the door opened, and Mrs. Alcorn came out onto the step in a shawl with her gray hair down her back like a girl's, and she saw the crest on the lead lantern, and she cried out, "Your Grace!" She came down the 2 steps into the snow in her slippers with both hands out. "Oh, Your Grace, after all these years." And she was glad. That is the thing I have never made anybody feel. 62 years old, in her nightgown, in the snow, at 2 in the morning, with her hands out and her whole face open like a window. She was glad. The man whose mother founded her house had come at last. She had waited 11 years to take his cold hands into her warm ones at that door. My brother stopped 6 feet from her and took his hat off. He did not give her his hands. And behind her, in the black rectangle of the doorway, in a plain gray gown, holding a candle, having come down her own stairs without hurrying, stood Hester Marlowe. She did not look at the Duke of Fenwarren. In all that yard, with 8 horses steaming and the lanterns going and the most powerful man in 3 counties standing bareheaded in her snow, she never once looked at him. She looked at me, and her face said, as clearly as if she had crossed that yard and said it into my ear, "You took a year. I have absolved murderers. It is my trade to know how forgiveness tastes and how long it takes to come. Nobody has ever forgiven me for those 11 months, least of all myself, and least of all for a very long time her." My brother did not go into the house. He stood in the middle of the yard in the cold, with the lanterns set down in a ring on the snow around him, and he said, "Miss Marlowe, come out here if you please." She came. She set her candle on the lid of the water butt, where it went out, and she came and stood in the ring of lanterns in front of him with her hands folded at her waist. She had no cloak on. I noticed it then in that light, for the first time in 12 visits, that the under-matron of the house I had been funding for 11 years stood in 9 degrees of frost in her sleeves, and I looked away from her, at the doorway, where 41 children were now packed into the dark of the passage in their shifts with their arms round each other, and there was a girl of about 9 at the front of them, in the doorway, wearing a woman's gray cloak that came down over her feet. "You count," said my brother. "Yes, sir. Count for me." And she did. She stood in front of the cold Duke of Fenwarren, 24 years old, a foundling out of a fish basket, in a yard she had swept 10,000 times, with her chapped hands folded in front of her and her breath going up white, and she counted. 9 children buried out of that house in 11 years, in order with their names, and where I had needed the sexton's book she needed nothing at all. 9 burial fees paid by the parish, 3 coffins made in this county, £6 12 shillings paid to a joiner at Kelso Bridge for the other 6, sundries, funerary per contract, and she gave the figure, and my brother's chin came up 1/4 of an inch, because she had it to the shilling, and she had never in her life seen his accounts. Every death in the last 3 days of December, every one worse in the night, every one gone by first light, every box closed, every one carried out by Mr. Bramfield's men in the dark down the north track, which is the longer way and which does not pass the dormitory windows. Every child 6 years old. The strong ones, never the sickly. She named the sickly, Bessie, who is 11 now and can whistle, a boy called Hart who was blue at birth and cannot run, a girl with a lame foot who was 7 this Michaelmas. Alive, all of them alive. And she said, and I am always sent to the bread yard, sir, every time. In the night when it starts, Mrs. Alcorn says to me, Hester, go and see to the morning's bread. There's a good girl at 2 in the morning, sir, go and see to the bread, and she says it kindly. And she is not sending me away, sir. She thinks she is sparing me, and she has thought so 9 times. And there is no bread to see to at 2 in the morning, and I have stood in that yard 9 times in the dark with nothing in my hands. Silence in that ring of lanterns. The bread, said my brother. The baker delivers by a list, sir. The list is written out in Mr. Bramfield's office and sent down to the baker at Ashby Cross at the quarter and altered when the numbers alter. 1 loaf a day for every 3 in the house. And in the January that Tobit Ware died, the loaves came 38 for 41 children, 3 loaves short. And I went to the baker myself, and I asked him for the docket, and he gave it me, and I have it, and it is dated the 28th of December. And the boy died on the 31st, sir. He was in the schoolroom on the 28th. I saw him. He had a nosebleed, and I held his head back. My brother stood very still. Say the rest, he said. There is a rest. And Hester Marlowe looked at him for the first time. It has happened 9 times, she said, and the bread has been altered before the death 8 of them, and the 9th I cannot prove because the docket was wet. 8 dockets, sir. 8 times somebody in an office 12 miles away took 3 loaves off the list for a child that was warm and well and eating them. Behind us, on the step in the dark, Mrs. Alcorn made a small sound. It was not a word. I have heard the noise perhaps twice more in my life, and both times in a sick room. My brother did not turn around. He kept his eyes on Hester Marlowe. Why did you not write to me? He said. And she said, without one particle of shame, in a yard full of lanterns and 8 strange men. I can't write, sir, not proper. I can read a docket, and I can do a sum, and I can make my name, and Mrs. Alcorn taught me that much, and no one taught her much either. I thought of getting the schoolmaster to write it, but then it would be his letter and not mine, and he would put it in his own words, and his words would be better than mine and less true. Her chin came up 1/2 an inch. And I did not think a duke would read a letter from this house at all, sir, seeing as you have never once come to it. The lanterns hissed. I have never in my life heard anything like the silence that followed. 6 of his own men in it, and the frost cracking in the water butt. No, said my brother, I have not. He was quiet a moment. The dockets, he said, where are they? Under my bed, sir, in a flour sack. I've no box. Ambrose, fetch it. I went up, past the packed dark passage of children, who parted from me, and up the front stair, and up the second stair, and up a third that was a ladder with a rail, to the room under the roof. It was 8 feet by 6. There was a cot with a straw mattress and 1 blanket and a bolster with no case on it. There was a nail in the beam with a gown hanging from it, and a second nail with nothing on it, which was where the cloak went, on the nights when it was not on a girl of about 9 standing in a doorway. There was no fire and no grate, and no place a fire had ever been. There was a window the size of a folio that did not open, and the frost was on the inside of it in ferns, thick enough to take the print of my thumb. There was a piece of soap in a saucer, and a comb, and a Bible I could not imagine her reading, and a wooden spoon. And under the cot, pushed back against the wall, a flour sack, tied at the neck with string. I got down on the boards in my wet coat and pulled it out, and it was heavy. It was heavy. It came out slow. It dragged, and I sat back on my heels on the floor of that room and put both arms round it, and it weighed, I should think, 3 stone. 4 years. Every docket, every scrap of paper that had come into that house with a number written on it, because a thing that is written down keeps better than a thing that is said, and because nobody would ever believe her, and she knew that. She had known it since she was 2 days old, and she had gone on saving them anyway in the dark under her own bed in a room with frost on the inside of the glass. I carried it down in both arms, the way a man carries a child, because there was no other way to hold it. I came down the 3rd stair and the 2nd and the 1st, and 41 children stood back against the wall of the passage and watched me carry it out, and Mrs. Alcorn stood on the step with her hands over her mouth, and I went out into the ring of lanterns, and I set that flour sack down on the boards of my brother's mother's house, at his feet, and untied nothing, because it was not mine to open. The Duke of Fenwarren looked at it. Then he took off his hat and handed it to the nearest of his men without looking at him, and he knelt down, the cold Duke, at 2 in the morning in his greatcoat, on the boards of a foundling house, with 100 people watching from the dark, and he pulled the string with his own hands, and set the lantern beside him on the floor, and began to read. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. He read for 2 hours. The frost cracked in the butt. One of the horses stamped. Somewhere behind us a small child asked a question and was hushed, and my brother went through that sack docket by docket, laying them out on the boards in years, in months, in weeks, building it back up in front of himself the way he had built it in his library out of green books that had lied to him. And Hester Marlowe stood over him the whole time with her hands folded, and did not once say there, and did not once say you see. At 4 o'clock he came to the last of them. He sat back on his heels in his ruined coat on the floor of that cold hall, and he looked at nothing for a while. And then he asked her one question, and it was not a question about the dead. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "which of them is 6? And she said, "Jonah's Cade, sir." Her voice did not change at all. "He'll be 6 on the 27th of December, she said. "He's 5 and 3 months. He's the one that climbs the wall to look at the moor, and I've whipped him for it twice, and he does it still." My brother got up off the floor. It took 9 days, and it was mostly ugly, and the ugliest part of it was innocent. They did not arrest Silas Bramfeld that night. My brother sat down in the parlor at Marchgate at 4 in the morning with the fire out, and wrote 3 letters at Mrs. Alcorn's table. One to a magistrate at Ashby Cross who had been on the bench 11 years, and had never once dined at Fenwarren, which was the only recommendation my brother required. One to a solicitor in London, and one, sealed, that he gave to his own groom with instructions to ride to Kelso Bridge, and put it into no hand but the constable's. Then he set 2 of his men on the Marchgate gate and 2 on the north track, and he said to Mrs. Alcorn, quite gently, "Madam, nobody is to leave this house, and nobody is to enter it, and I will not have you weep in front of the children." She said, "But your grace leave." And he said, "Yes, madam," and went out to the horses. She turned to me. "I have never been looked at so before," she said. "Mr. Thackeray, what have I done?" And I could not answer her, because the answer was nothing, and it was the worst word I had ever had in my mouth. Understand her. If you understand nothing else in this account, understand her. Mrs. Alcorn had signed no paper. She had taken no money. My brother's men went through her room that week, and her whole property was a work box, a locket, £11 saved in 19 years, and a bundle of letters from children who had gone out to good places and written back. She had suspected nothing. She had not been careless. She had, on 9 occasions across 11 years, sat up all night with a burning child and prayed and sponged its face and held it and wept over it and slept at last on a chair from sheer weeping. It was done like this, and Bramfeld's own clerk gave it up on the 6th day, and Dr. Wayland, a shaking man, a ruined man who wept a great deal and made me want to strike him, which is not a thing a clergyman may write down, gave the rest. A few grains of laudanum in the last cup of milk on a night chosen a week before, enough to make a strong child of 6 hot and slow and heavy and hard to rouse, never enough to harm. Wayland was particular about that. He said so in that room to my brother's face, as though it were a thing that might be set to his credit. I was most particular, your grace. They were never in any danger. Then Wayland, summoned at 2 in the morning through the snow, God bless the man. Then the grave face and the hand on the old woman's shoulder, and there is nothing to be done. Then the sleep of an exhausted woman of 60. Then the closed box in the hall at first light and Bramfeld's men and the north track. And then a coach at the crossroads and the long road up, and Kelso Bridge, and a crate. And the child, this is the part that has cost me the most sleep. The child woke at the turn of the north track, in the dark, in a box, alive. 9 times. She would not believe it. My brother told her himself in the parlor on the 2nd day, because he would not have it done by a magistrate or by me. I was in the room. He sat opposite her with his hands on his knees, and he said it plainly, in order, with the figures, and he did not spare her and he did not hurry, and when he had finished, Mrs. Alcorn sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the fire and said, "But I sat with Tobit. Yes. I had him in my arms. Yes. He was so hot. Your grace, he was so hot. I have never felt a child so hot. Madam, he had been given laudanum. I held his hand. Her voice went up and broke and came down somewhere very small. I held his hand, and I told him God was near. And my brother said, and I have never known whether it was the cruelest sentence I have ever heard or the kindest, and I have decided at last that it was neither, and that it was simply true, which is a third thing. Madam, God was nearer than you knew. He was in the bread yard, counting." Mrs. Alcorn turned her head. Hester was standing by the door with a tray, because she had brought the tea in, because somebody had to, because there were 41 children in that house who still wanted their dinners, whatever the Duke of Fenwarren was doing in the parlor. The old woman looked at her. She looked at the girl she had fed with a rag dipped in milk, drop by drop, every 2 hours for a month, in a January so hard they could not bury Widow Sallow for a fortnight. The girl she had raised and cuffed and taught to make her name. The girl she had sent to the bread yard 9 times at 2 in the morning, kindly, to spare her. The girl she had called my poor odd girl at 100 teas, fondly, in Hester's hearing, while Hester poured. Mrs. Alcorn opened her mouth and shut it, and no sound came out of her at all. And Hester Marlowe crossed that room and put a cup of tea into the old woman's hands and closed her fingers round it, one and then the other, the way you do with a person who is going to drop it. "Drink that," she said. That is all she ever said to her about any of it, in that room or any other, in the whole of the rest of their lives together in that house. 22 years, and never one word of it again. I do not know what my brother thought of God, or of my mother's charity, or of me. In the 11 years he signed those pages and never came. But I saw his face while he watched a barely lettered foundling close an old woman's hands round a teacup, and I know precisely what he thought at that moment, because his face, the north side of the church, did a thing I had not seen it do since our father's funeral, and did not see it do again for a year and a half. It broke. Bramfeld ran on the 3rd day, an hour before the constable came, and left his spaniels shut in the office with a bowl of water, and a note asking that they be given to a good home. My brother read that note twice and put it in the fire. They took him at Kelso Bridge, at the joiner's yard, which is where the boxes came from. The joiner's name was Wickers, and he had never made a coffin in his life. He had made in 11 years 9 crates of rough deal, 3 feet by 2, with rope handles let into the ends and 6 3/4-inch holes bored in the lid. Bored carefully, evenly, The way a good workman does a thing he has been told to do and has decided not to think about, and he had been paid £1 4 shillings for each, and he had never asked, because a man does not ask a gentleman, and because it was none of his business, and because he had 4 children of his own to feed, and there is no end to that sentence, and never has been. The agent's name I will not write. He is dead now. He kept a book, and the book was in his coat when they took him, and it was a good book, better kept than my brother's, and every entry in it was a name and an age and a sum. 9 names. 6 of them were still in the world. 2 are not, and I set them down here because there is nowhere else to set them down. Robert Grange died of a fever in his 2nd year at a mill in the West Riding, and is buried under the name they gave him, which was Cade, which is the commonest name in that town, and was given to a great many boys. Lucy Soule died at 14. I have been to the ground. I have stood at the wall. And Anne Fetch we never found. She went out of that gate in her 6th year with the frost on the north track, and she is not in any book that any man could put his hand on, and she is not in the mill's rolls, and she is not in the ground at the mill, and she is not anywhere, and I have looked for 11 years, and I am looking still. She is in my prayers every night of my life, and she will be until I am done, and I say her name last, after my wife's and my brother's and my children's, because I do not want her to be one of a number. 6 then. 6 children came back. They came in April, in a wagon with a canvas over it, up the Marchgate Road. My brother had ridden out 3 miles to meet them, alone, and turned and came back at the wagon's pace, bareheaded at a walk, not speaking for 3 miles. It was a Tuesday. The whole of Marchgate was in the yard, and the whole of Coombe Ashby was in the road, and the joiner end coin stood at the gate-post where the letters were standing out of the stone, and he had made a bench that week without being asked of good elm, and had shaved the edges soft, and it stands in that yard to this day. The canvas came off. They were not children. That is the thing nobody had prepared for, and I do not think anybody could have. 6 years had gone by for the oldest of them and 1 year for the youngest, and they came down out of that wagon one at a time, and the whole crying, cheering road went quiet, because they came down like old men. They came down looking at the ground. There was a girl of 13 who would not let go of the wagon rail and had to be lifted, and she weighed nothing. Tobit Ware came last. He was 13. He had been 6 when he went out of that gate in a crate with 6 holes in the lid, and he came back through it a boy grown, with a mill cough that turned him inside out for half a minute at a time, and left him hanging on to a wheel spoke, and a right hand that had lost 2 fingers to a carding engine. He stood in the yard in a suit of clothes my brother had bought him at the bridge, which did not fit, and he looked round at 41 children and 100 villagers and a duke, and he did not know one single face in the world. Mrs. Alcorn came forward with her arms out and stopped, because he flinched. And then he stopped too. He turned his head slowly, the way a man does when he has heard a sound behind him he has not heard for a long time, past my brother, past the matron, past the whole weeping village, and he looked at the far end of the yard at the water butt, where a woman in a plain gray gown was standing well back, out of the way, with her red hands folded, who had not called out and had not come forward and had not touched him. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're the bread lady," he said. And Hester Marlowe, who had never in 24 years let a living soul see her weep, put both her cracked hands over her face and sat down on the edge of the water butt in front of 600 people. My brother crossed that yard in 4 strides and stood in front of her with his back to the crowd. He did not touch her. He did not speak to her. He stood there in his greatcoat, a wall between that woman and every eye in the county, for as long as it took, and it took some time, and the Duke of Fenwarren looked out over the heads of the people who feared him with an expression that dared any one of them to still be watching. That is when I knew. The trustees met in June, in the long room at Fenwarren Hall, and my brother had the 11 green volumes carried in on a tray by a footman, and set on the table in front of him, and he opened the last one at the last page, and turned it round so that the whole bench could read it upside down. Then he put his finger on his own signature. "Gentlemen," he said, "I did not do this, I paid for it." Old Furrs, who was 90 and asleep for most of everything, said something about a man's not being able to oversee every particular of every charity in his gift, and there was a murmur along the table of gentlemen agreeing that this was so. And it was so, and every one of them was thinking of his own name at the foot of his own pages. "Yes," said my brother, "that is precisely what I relied upon." He let it sit. So did he. Nobody said anything after that for a while. He laid two proposals before them. The first was that the Marchgate charity would find every child indentured, apprenticed, bound, or sent out of any charitable house in that county in the last 20 years, and would pay whatever it cost to find them, and would not stop when it became expensive, and would not stop when it became embarrassing. And he said this looking down the table, one man at a time, would not stop when the trail went in at the door of a gentleman's house. It was carried. It has cost to this day rather more than £9,000. It has found 41 people. I know the number. The second proposal was that Marchgate should have a new charter, and that no child of that house should ever again be bound, apprenticed, moved, sent, or carried out of its gate, living or dead, without two signatures on the page. "Whose?" said Furrs. "The child's," said my brother. There was some noise at that. "They are 6 years old," said a man at the end of the table. "They cannot write." "Then they will make a mark," said the Duke of Fenwarren, "and it will be witnessed, and if a child of 6 cannot be got to make a mark on a paper, gentlemen, that is a fact about the paper." "And the second signature?" "Not the matron's, not the trustees." He paused, "Not mine." He looked at the window, where the June light was coming in on the 11 green books. "There will be an officer of this charity," he said, "whose whole employment is to count the children, every morning in the yard aloud by name, who will be paid a salary and given a room with a fire in it, and whose counting will be entered in the book above the trustee's hand and below nobody's. And when that officer says that the number is wrong, the number is wrong, and this bench will sit within a week." The silence went on rather long. "That," said somebody, "is a servant's office." "It is the only office in this charity," said my brother, "which, in 11 years, has been discharged." He courted her badly. He had no practice at it, and no talent for it, and no idea at all how it was done. And he was the most feared man in 3 counties, and he sat in a bread yard on an upturned bucket, and could not make a sentence. He came on Tuesdays. The first Tuesday he brought her a book, because he was a man who read, and it was the only present he had ever given anyone in his life that meant anything, and she turned it over in her red hands and gave it back to him. "I can't read that," she said. "I can read a docket and I can do a sum. I told you so in the yard. If you've come to make me ashamed of it, you needn't have brought the horse." Any other man in England would have gone. I have wondered sometimes whether she meant him to. He said, "Then I will bring a slate." And he did, for a year on Tuesdays in that yard, and I have seen it with my own eyes, and so has half the parish. The Duke of Fenwarren sitting on an upturned bucket in the rain with a slate on his knee, spelling out bread for a woman who could count it in her sleep, and coal and docket and Marchgate, and Jonah's Cade, aged 5 years and 3 months, who climbs the wall to look at the moor. He never once wrote Duchess. She was slow at it, and hated being slow, and threw the slate across the yard exactly once, in the November, and it broke. And he got up and picked up the pieces and said nothing, and came back the following Tuesday with another one and put it into her hands and said, "Again," and sat down on his bucket. The county talked. Of course it talked. They said she was a schemer and a fish basket and worse. Mrs. Wayland, whose husband was by then gone from this country and does not come into this account again, was heard to say in the market at Ashby Cross that some women will climb by any ladder, and that it was a great pity, she said, that a girl with no more wit than a gatepost should be raised so far above her station. Hester Marlowe went on counting at 7 in the morning in the yard, aloud by name. 41. Then in the autumn of the second year, 47, because the charter had brought them in. Then 52. She answered none of it. She has never, to my knowledge, answered any of it. He asked her in the November, 2 years after the wagon. Not at the hall, not before witnesses. In the bread yard at first light, in fog, when she had just come to the end of the names, and the last of them was standing out white in the air in front of her. I was not there. I have it from her once, years afterward, at my own table, and she told it the way she tells everything, plainly, in order with the numbers in. He said that he had put his name 11 times to a thing he had not read. He said that she had read a thing that nobody had signed. He said that between the two of them they made one whole and honest person, and that he did not think he could go on being the worse half of it at a distance of 4 miles. And she stood in the fog with her hands folded and said, "Say it properly." And he said, "I have never asked anyone for anything in my life." And she said, "I know that's the whole trouble with you, ask." So the Duke of Fenwarren took his hat off in a Foundling house's bread yard at 7 o'clock on a November morning, and asked a woman who had been left in a fish basket to marry him. She looked at him a long moment, and then she said the thing she had wanted for 24 years in that house, which was not yes, and was not your grace, and was worth more to her than the hall and the name and being warm for the rest of her life. Count them with me tomorrow. He was there at 7. He has been there at 7. On every morning he has been at home for 22 years. She is 50 now and he is 64, and he cannot dance, and she cannot be got to sit for a portrait. They have 3 living children and one they lost, and the lost one is in the north corner of the ground at Coombe Ashby, 4 graves down from Susan Bright, and my brother goes there in the last week of December every year and stands a long time and comes back and says nothing about it. There is a bench of good elm in the yard at Marchgate that a joiner made without being asked. There is a stone in the gatepost with a woman's name on it, and beneath it, on a newer stone that Corwin had cut and set himself, there are names, 41 of them now, all the ones we found and brought home, in no order of rank, in letters of the same size, and at the top of them first alone, because she is not with the others and never was. And fetch. The frost lifts them a little further out of the stone every winter. Year by year they stand up out of the wall and grow easier to read, and the children who go by that gate to school put their fingers into the letters without knowing why, the way children do. And on the coldest mornings, when the yard is white and the loaves are counted and the last name has been said aloud into the fog, my brother, who is old now and stiff and still cannot dance, and who has never once in 22 years told his wife that she was clever, takes both her hands, the red ones, the cracked ones, that no gloves and no fires and no duchy have ever been able to mend, and holds them against his coat, and tells her she was believed,